Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Blend Evolve podcast on simulations. I'm happy to be joined here with Brett King, who is kind of world-renowned futurist, author, and pioneer in the fintech and banking space. And then Jesse Fagan, who is our head of data science for the Blend Synthetic Studios. And then me, I'm Alex Sion. I head up financial services at Blend. And today we're going to be talking about simulations and the work that Blend is doing within the simulation space, particularly for its Fortune 1000 clients. Let's start off, Brett, by talking a little bit, stepping away back a little bit back. You're a pilot. I don't know if a lot of people know that, but you're a pilot. And so
Yeah.
I'm assuming you spend a lot of time on flight simulators. You're in pretty much your entire life. So I'd love to hear you just talk about simulators and your experience with them and how you think about kind of simulation and its value to you as a pilot and just in your life in general.
Well, I mean, I'm also a gamer, Alex, and so simulation is a big part of gaming. A lot of commercial flight training is done in simulators these days, motion simulators. When you're doing your instrument rating training, much of that is done on simulators, even for general aviation pilots. Because you're having to simulate not necessarily the flying of the aircraft, the aviating stuff. You're looking to learn navigation, radio aids, things like this, control of the cockpit management. The first time I flew a turbine, a jet, was in a simulator. You're not going to, they're not going to hand you the controls of a jet before you've done simulator time. So, most airlines are doing qualifying flights in simulators, primarily before they shift to actual aircraft flying. And that is so you can get used to the environment as a pilot, the decision-making process, the checklists, all of those things in a very safe environment.
But then how is that like that sort of like, simulation and then like translation to real life? What's your experience from that standpoint? Like how does the simulation kind of relate to real life or sort of compare to it?
I mean, it depends on the quality of the simulator, but these days, even general aviation flying schools will have simulators that are accurate in terms of the gear, the displays, the controls, and so forth. The only thing that really changes is motion and visuals, right? So, but the aircraft responds in exactly the way it would respond in the real world. You are using all of the same techniques. So, in the simulator, you can develop the muscle memory for the real thing because of its accuracy. And so
I
that's
love that.
really sort of the key thing.
So building on that, Jesse, like maybe your perspective of what Brett just said, the muscle memory of the real thing, when you think about the work and sort of the theory that we of simulation that we've been applying at Blend, like how do you kind of translate that?
Well, if we're gonna do a direct translation, um, it's like the difference between trying to train a salesperson to get out there. So are we training the person or are we training the organization? I think in a lot of the ways that Blend is doing things is like we're trying to train the organization as a whole, try and prep it to move out into the market. So it's not like an individual level. Now we have done things like that. We have projects where we've simulated a sales call, or we had something that recorded a sales call and then had like training afterwards about how to like improve on this particular kind of sales. But that's not broadly what we're doing. We're talking about trying to stimulate a market, and what would it be like for the organization to move out into that market and do things in that space. And can we be prepared for all the contingencies that might occur? That's what we're looking at, which is a little different.
Yeah, awesome. So, and Brett, maybe from your hat on as a futurist, now that simulations, like you said, they've been involved in sort of training and airline training and more high impact sort of training for quite some time, and in the gaming industry. But now that's sort of we're in the AI era. How do you think that changes the future of simulation?
Well, what you can do with AI these days, of course, is you can simulate environments very rapidly. And so when we start talking about how it applies to AI, we have NVIDIA Isaac, for example, and other environments now which are used to simulate real world environments for training AI and robots, for example. So you can expose robots to thousands of simulations in a very short period of time, where that would have traditionally taken weeks of training in real world setup and real world environments. So that's one area. But of course, the other area that we're looking at is broadly digital twin enablement. So when we talk about how to tokenize the world and make it machine readable for artificial intelligence, then you will have real-time data available, but you're using simulated environments to sort of map that data on. And a good example of that is what you would see in a Tesla vehicle when it's using autopilot. You have a simulated representation of the real world on the screen, which is essentially trying to model the real world as accurately as possible. So increasingly the worlds of reality and the simulated worlds from an AI machine readable perspective are sort of merging together.
I love that. I love that. Now, Jesse, maybe let's move to talk a little bit about some of the work Blend is doing to unlock sort of the inherent potential of LLM to simulate people and their behaviors. Maybe talk a little bit about that, and then I'd love to have Brett react.
Sure. So I've spent a lot of time in my career, for instance, working on complex adaptive systems, trying to create agent-based models for behavior. And usually what we do to simulate a human is that it gets reduced to just very simple kind of interaction rules, and you're trying to simulate groups of people making decisions. What we're doing now with LLMs is that we can get far more detailed with the actual simulation of human behavior and how a person would react to certain kinds of stimulus. What we're finding right now is, in the academic research on this, is finding that dense personas, so if you take a persona and really flesh it out with as much detail as you think is relevant, as a population, they will perform very similar to the real target populations. So we're seeing evidence of replicating marketing surveys, or marketing studies, where you have a set of marketing studies that were published on preferences for different kinds of products or offerings, and we're finding that something like 90% of the time, the LLM population is replicating that. So what we're seeing is an opportunity now to replicate human preference and behavior at a level of detail that we weren't able to do before. And so there's been a lot of work, especially here at Blend, but out there in academia as well, in terms of how can this be leveraged, and how do you make it really valuable and reliable? And so that's a lot of what we've been working on lately, is how to do that and how to really leverage that level of detail. We can give it images, we can give it all sorts of applications, anything in the digital world. This is something you can interact with and experience, which has become a huge part of our economy, is the digital part of the world anyway. So we can simulate a large proportion of actual interaction with customers now.
So Brett, I'd love you to build on that, like the thought of ChatGPT is an inherent people simulator, right? And sort of the power that's kind of within that. What are your thoughts on that, what Jesse just said?
Well, I think, the fact that we can sort of mimic human behavior quite accurately in many aspects. You've got, again, in the gaming environments, you've got simulations that have sort of scaled up to civilization level sort of complexity. For example, Project Sid, which was on top of Minecraft, created a simulation of 500 AI agents, I think it was, without explicit instructions, but they developed their own culture, religious, taxation systems. There was social evolution apparent in this. You have digital twins of cities in China being simulated for including in urban planning and things like this. So I think in reality, the amount of data that AI is pulling in a lot of where the applications are of AI, in real world, have to include some sort of simulation. Because if you are, for example, diagnosing, cancer on AI, what you're actually doing is you're simulating the process of diagnosis that radiologists and oncologists use in the field. Now, you're priming that from behavioral data. This is why we call it deep learning or machine learning. The better you can simulate that sort of learning approach, based on real human data, the more accurate you're going to get in terms of diagnosis and simulation. In fact, to the point now where, yeah, in many of these arenas, the AI is even more accurate consistently than humans because of the behavioral data we've fed into it. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
What I love about this and some of the work that we're seeing, Brett, is this combination of hardcore data and analytics combined with creativity of how you create the simulation, right? How you model the simulation. There's so much art, I think, in sort of like, creating a real life simulation environment that balances both the creative aspects as well as the technical and analytic aspects. Jesse, maybe I'd love you to talk a little bit about that, designing a simulation. What does it take to actually design a realistic simulation? And maybe Brett, same thing, like is a pilot. Like I'm assuming the simulations have improved over time, right? The more realistic it gets, the better it is at sort of as an education tool. So maybe talk about that, like the advancements of simulation creativity and design.
One of the first things we aim for, like at a base level for our simulations, for instance, is they need to be useful. It has to be something where the outputs from it are going to be something that you can make useful decisions from, and so the realism is important. So right now, for instance, we try to simulate what's happening at the decision point, like when a customer is making a decision to choose a flight, when they're making a decision to choose one product or another. So we try to simulate that exact decision point as much as possible. So multimodal LLMs are really useful for that, and that we can actually provide images and have them kind of triage a situation and figure out which they would choose. For instance, email marketing, or if you had a planogram for a retail setting, or um, just looking at a certain website and choosing offers that could be available or products that are on a page. Or if you're searching for flights or you're searching for a hotel and you look at what's been listed. So we try to simulate those actual decision points where people are when they're choosing which hotel am I going to choose, which flight am I going to choose. And we find that that's the most useful kind of way to approach this and give useful results to our clients in this situation. But there's a lot of craft there. So we find that like LLMs do not behave the same way as real people do in a lot of key ways. Like if we try to simulate Likert scales, you try to ask it to score something on a 1 to 5 scale. These LLMs will always say the number 3, like they just always do. So we have to find other ways to get them to simulate using a survey or answering a question in a way that we can get useful feedback. And that's one of the things we tried to tease out is interacting with and performing this is a little bit different than working with a human in order to get realistic results from them. And a lot of that we're learning as we go, and we're finding a lot of techniques that work really well. And then there's other places where we still need to refine.
Yeah, maybe build on that, Brett. When you think about sort of simulations and the advancements and sort of you're a designer too, right? Coming from a UX background, as sort of is simulation gonna sort of like force designers to up their game in terms of their ability to kind of develop, kind of true to life sort of scenarios in the real world?
Well, I think it already is, Alex. I think it is pushing, you can use LLMs for some pretty convincing generation of what we would have called creative assets previously. I'm working on the new book right now, and I'm generating all of my tables and all of my charts and things in AI. And I'm doing that, even where I have, for example, reference charts, from another publication. I'm reproducing those graphs in my own style for the book, as an example. So, I have a lot more creative control these days. We've been designing an app recently, and we got the creative concepts back from the creative director, and we're able to sort of run that through with AI, with us having a discussion with the AI to tweak the user interface. Of course, we see what's happening in Hollywood right now with video generation and things there. Some Seed Dance has created a lot of speculation about what impact it's going to have on the Hollywood industry creatively. So there's definitely creative pressure coming on this. In terms of how this affects the accuracy of simulations, then this sort of leads into very interesting territory, and I threatened to talk about this before we started the show, but it sort of it goes into simulation theory, and which is you are now having, for example, using augmented reality head-up display or virtual reality environments. You can train people in all sorts of environments. You can train doctors to operate on patients. The Artemis 2 mission that's happening right now, these guys spent 10,000 hours plus in simulators getting prepared for this over years, all in simulation because they couldn't go to space to practice, right? So, so these simulated environments are that good that we use them today for a whole level of training. The question is, when simulations get so good that we can't tell the difference from the real world, and we're not that far away from that, that poses a sort of existential or philosophical question: is, are we living in a simulation? And of course, you probably know this in 2003. This is Nick Bostrom's thought argument on the simulation that and the math sort of checks out. The Matrix movie is based on this, and others as well. But the math sort of checks out in that the likelihood that we're actually in the original base reality is sort of many billions to one. But having said that, I think the scientific evidence these days still supports that we're in a real world.
I love it. I love it. So last area to talk about, and then maybe we'll go into a little demo to show it is so now simulations are a thing, right? Like now AI has enabled simulation at mass scale. Blend's doing a lot of work with simulating kind of audiences and customer bases and how they react to products and services and marketing. And so then if you think about the impact on the traditional product or marketing life cycle, right? So much of traditional business to date has been based upon making decisions of what they expect, what they think customers might do, right? Historical patterns, kind of looking at that and doing tons of analytics on that space. In the world where a designer, to your point, Brett, doesn't have to go to market and fail, right? In order to learn and then iterate fast, you and I both created a startup where the whole point was fail fast. Maybe you don't have to do that anymore, right? And that's a very expensive path. So maybe a little bit, Brett, I'd love your thought on sort of product development now and businesses in the world of simulation, like where so much expense is sort of locked in failure, right, in the market. I would love your thoughts on kind of the world we're in from that perspective.
I think that's a really interesting point, Alex, is that, we're at that point now where we can simulate customer responses. We can do that en masse. We can have agents going out and actually sort of testing, doing what we call A/B testing. We can do that in a simulated environment. They can certainly do it in the real world as well. And so increasingly, I think you're going to have, when we talk about hyperscaling and these businesses that are hyperscaling, the ability to roll out a product and iterate on a product very rapidly is certainly one of those things that we have. I remember when you left Movin and you went to Chase to head up mobile there, Alex. I'm going to tell you, I've actually put this story somewhat in the new book, so I'll have to share it with you to get your sign off. But I remember you saying to me that if you wanted to insert new features or something into the app, it was going to be a year. In that cycle, right? And that's not uncommon for major institutions in this space today. But if you take the best challenger neobanks in the world today, players like Revolut, players like WeBank has this team that can using simulation and using modeling can now launch from concept a new product in about 6 hours into the market and test it on I tested on tens of thousands of people, in that rollout phase, and then tweak it in real time. Right. That this is really sort of this optimization of creativity and marketing that we're seeing, and simulation is going to push that into moments where you have an idea and then within an hour you can have something pushed out. So it really is a game changer. But I think this is sort of all part of how we think about autonomous finance evolving as well. Is we have to start thinking about the fact that AI is going to be able to come up with products and services in real time based on behavioral responses that are getting that we could never compete with from a human design process perspective.
So Justin, maybe segueing over to you, like we have a little bit of a demo that we can sort of like play around with here, and I'd love for let's walk through that and see if if Brett can challenge our simulations here, and let's see if we can design something super fast.
Design something. So we have
maybe just a little much. Just let's survey the audience.
Let's survey an audience. Let's just see what that looks like. Let me present a screen real quick. Well, this is what we've done is we've taken our kind of our simulation platform, we broke it down into components, and we let agents run it now. So the idea is that we can propose a somewhat vague question. Let's dive into something real quick. Alex, you had an idea, or Brett, you have an idea. Let's see. There's a product idea. We talk about flight simulators. Let's try. I don't know. Let's see here. We want
Brett. I know you're working on a startup with a toothbrush.
Yeah, look, could we use that example? So, we have a AI-based toothbrush. It has a intraoral camera that can be used with our AI model to detect cavities and detect oral health issues that need addressing by a dentist. My question would be, how would we position this in the market? It's a smart toothbrush, but it's also an AI service, subscription service. How do we position that in the market for market entry?
Do you have a particular audience that you were thinking of, or were you thinking about Gen Pop?
I'd say similar to those that are interested in the quantified self movement. So like Whoop, Fitbit type, fitness and longevity fans.
All right. I'm hoping this runs really smoothly. All right. Interview live now.
So
what we've done is we've kind
of taking notes.
Decomposited our kind of like simulation workflow into a set of tools so that agents can use them. So it can run kind of end-to-end a study. So right now what it's doing is it's trying to come up with a study design. So here's how I would design this. So we have, this is the topic, and the research goal is to learn how to position this product in the market for these audiences.
Good.
So then what we do is we would simulate a moderator to do a focus group discussion. And these are the questions they're going to ask in the discussion rounds, like perceived value, subscription and willingness to pay, and their trust around privacy and adoption. So these are the questions they're going to ask about for this group. Seems reasonable enough for the kinds of questions I might ask. Let's see. So we approve it. The next thing it's going to do is going to assemble a panel. Now we have two different methods. We have an existing library of, and in this case, we have the library we have is very young because we've been focusing on Gen Z. So what we're going to look at, I think, is kind of like quantified. I'm not saying this quantified self. People in kind of like the Gen Z market, so early 20s. So let's just start there for now and just see. The level of detail we put onto these, we found that like dense personas perform a lot better than sparse personas. Meaning sparse is like you just give it like a name, a gender, like a location. Whereas dense personas, we iterate. We try to add flesh to these things. We say, okay, so you have certain kinds of hobbies, you have certain kinds of likes and dislikes. We find that those are really useful, creating useful, realistic simulations. And so now it's proposed, it's like, okay, we have the panel, we have the study set up, let's run the experiment. So what it's going to do is it's going to run a focus group simulation with a moderator that's going to be checking this. When we run this with clients, we often try to align our simulations with real data in terms of themes. So like real people will bring up these themes or these topics during the conversation. We try to see if our synthetic audiences do the same. And so that's how we tune these. So right now they are currently having a discussion.
They're chatting about the product here, Brett.
Let me see. And it's going fast enough that I can't keep up right now.
That's great.
They're talking about the process of cleaning their
teeth.
and the how they expect this thing to work while they're
Can you
cleaning.
insert feedback into this process as it's live, or do
The
you?
current one, no, but yes,
Okay.
we have versions of it where you can chat with the audience as the focus group is going. That is absolutely an option. For this one, it just runs it.
No, that's
Analyzing.
So then we have like we can run, several hundred focus groups in parallel. And the idea though, is that it will end up generating a tremendous amount of data. So we also put agents on the other end of this to analyze the results because it produces a tremendous amount of data. We've compiled it into a jobs to be done. So let's see here, jobs to be done framework. We've done the top 5 jobs. The first one is when I finish brushing, I want the device to tell me immediately whether the capture was valid, so I know whether or not to trust any feedback. So some sort of UI that says like it got the data that it needed and it quality data. The second one says when the system detects a problem, I want one clear corrective instruction so I can act in seconds, not a dashboard or a lecture.
I guess it's going to be brush more.
So yeah, I mean we've tried to anticipate that, but yeah.
Well, this is great. This is great. So Brett,
Okay.
again, just to wrap up,
That's
I
good.
know we're coming up at a time, but the idea of simulations, right? So closing thoughts in light of sort of the advancements of AI and technology, Brett, and computing power and energy, right? When now corporations, especially in the banking world, have the availability to kind of create tools like Desi just showed, where are we going? What do you think? If you're sort of like advising a bank to think about product design and development, like what are you going to be saying?
Look, I think the direction is clear. Within 5 to 7 years, a lot of this will be being done by AI agents. It'll be, that'll be something we can farm off. There'll be humans in the loop before a product goes to market, but the entire process, the messaging, and so forth is just now a set of prompt tools. So if you don't have that capability, you're literally months and months behind your competitors in terms of your ability to respond. A good example of this is, Revolut just launched Air, which is their AI by Revolut. It's an AI assistant, and Alex, it's like we had this concept at Movement of the money coach. So they have this AI money coach that runs your money and can handle your money. So my view is moving forward in financial services, we are going to remove the interface. We are in terms of the UX, it's just going to be you talking to your personal AI, and your personal AI is going to tell you, well, this is your financial situation. Did you want me to tweak your investments? What's your objective here? Oh, you've got these bills coming up that you need to think about. And that's going to be your interface to at least a retail financial services level. It's a little different on the SME and corporate side. So if you can't use this type of simulation capability, if you don't have AI agents building out your capability to respond, you are literally going to be months behind your competitors.
Yep, love that. And Jesse, maybe a final word from you when you think about what's your call to action to clients, like in terms of sort of the technology. What are the patterns you're seeing, and what do you think the market needs?
Well, I think that every company on earth is going to have something like this at some point. It depends whether or not it's going to be like a turnkey. I put my credit card in and I now use a service that simulates my audience, or if it's going to be a custom enterprise scale thing that integrates with all your systems. But at some level, every company is going to have something like this. It's going to be about as key as having like a marketing budget. You're going to have a simulation budget to kind of like think through next steps.
Yep.
And I agree with Brett. I think that the world's going to change. Like the interface that you actually have with systems is going to change dramatically. I think it's going to be more conversational, more interactive, and that there's going to be less emphasis on UI and such. But in order to develop those systems and make sure they're safe and reliable, like you're going to need something like this to test it and simulate it as well.
I love it. So let me summarize, guys. So we've been talking here about simulations, and I think the way I think about it is exactly what Jesse said. There's in the business world today, there have been very few use cases, maybe in the industrial space, maybe in the aerospace space, where simulations have been kind of like part of the business model. Certainly not as much within financial services, and certainly not related to kind of like marketing or user experience or digital design or anything like that. But I do think we're entering an era where simulation will be a part of your budget. If you're not figuring out how to simulate audiences and test product and marketing ideas and strategies in very rapid fashion, then as Brad has mentioned, you're just going to be months behind, right? Where the competitors are going, and in a world where the customer is being educated so quickly and moving so fast, that's a risk. It's a big risk. So we're really excited about the world of simulations. Thanks, Brett. Thanks, Jesse, for taking the time to talk about it on the Evolve podcast. And we'll see you next time.